all of your time out of the...
Hello.
Yeah. Huh? The moment you start talking to
Hello.
Corey, especially Corey, the moment you start talking to Corey, he just tries to suck all the life out of you. He doesn't want to let you go anywhere. He doesn't want to... Just wants to bend your ear with just irrelevant ideas.
He likes you.
No, it's not a matter of him liking me. Corey has no friends. He just needs to talk to someone. He just has no friends. He just wants
Corey,
to talk to people.
If you're listening, I'm sorry. That broke your heart.
Seriously, I just try to tell him all the time, Corey, I don't have time to talk to you. I don't have time for you, Corey. He says, yes, you do. Yes, you do. I said, no, Corey, I don't. I really
He's
don't.
going to send you a Valentine this year, and you're going to feel sad because you were so mean to him.
No,
He'll say, I'll be your Valentine.
He expects us, listen, he expects us to be mean to him now. He honestly thinks that he's the reason why we have anybody reading or watching our blogs in the first place.
It's probably true, though.
Yeah. It's because we just crack on Corey. That's all we do.
We missed you last week.
Well, it was the show last week was missing a little flavor.
I know, a little flavor.
There's a bit of flavor.
Right.
a little sauce.
So you actually watched that? Oh, that's
I
good.
actually did watch the show.
Imagine that you actually watched the show.
Oh, well. I noticed that somebody was cracking on me at the very beginning, but I let it go because he's such a hateful guy. I mean, it's such a nice guy.
Hey man, this summer when you were busting on me.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Oh my gosh.
This summer I just never gave you a break.
Oh man.
Yeah, that's true. He was pretty hard on you this summer.
Although it was a fun summer.
Last week was a fun week.
Now, kids,
and we got through some material, and we heard things that were actually worth it listening to.
I did get through a lot of that. I got through like 6 stories out of my big pile of stuff.
Yeah, right.
It just goes to show you that, like I said, there was missing.
So who's
some
trying to
flavor.
get away from whom?
There's
was
missing
Corey
some
trying to get away
flavor.
from you, or you from Corey?
There was missing some flavor and some sauce because you actually got through a lot of things. You shouldn't get through a lot of things. There's a lot to talk about.
Well, there was, but I tied in those things to the important discussions of theology, which we're going to continue today.
We are.
We're going to continue to look
Can
at
you handle that?
Theological stuff, and then the implications and applications of that.
There's the door.
That's good.
There.
Yeah.
Are you kicking me out?
And I'm just saying.
I was going to tell you this interesting story about what happened yesterday when Ward and I went over across the street.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
I won't do it. It won't be. It's not. It's funny, but it's not funny.
Yeah, no.
No, and it can't be shared publicly. Is that?
Well, it can be shared publicly. It just wouldn't be nice.
Oh, okay. Well, then we don't want to share it. Then. We want to share nice stories.
Nice. I know my wife loves nice.
Yes, we want to make your wife happy.
She's about nice.
We're going to make her proud of you.
About nice.
That's going to take a lot of work, but we're going to make her proud of you.
Okay. What do we have today?
All right. What do you want to jump? Do you want to jump right into the next?
We can.
Thing,
we had a fun one, and I forgot what it was. You
Oh.
had a fun one? Oh man.
I don't really have any good.
I mean,
fun
a couple of
stories.
We
days
can talk
ago.
about witches in Hollywood.
Witches in Hollywood.
I mean, it's
the Wicca.
It's Halloween.
Thing? Oh, okay.
It's Halloween.
What do you know about that?
Are they going to dress up as not witches?
How about this? I mean, isn't it interesting how many witches are going and hexing Brett Kavanaugh? And I mean, come on, that is seriously happening.
It's just ridiculous.
I mean, the gallon that's running for Senate in Arizona, invited witches to do a hex on someone. I mean, seriously. I mean, this is some years ago, but still.
This is your leaders, your thoughtful leaders.
Yeah.
Hard at work.
I demand a separation between Wicca and state.
Oh, man.
Well, the crazy things we do. Oh, man. Well, it just shows the things we do. Okay, this is not a funny story. This is a story that we will never otherwise talk about. But it's funny. It's a little funny. I'm going to share this as a funny story. Because then I get to get rid of it.
Oh,
that's my goal, is to get rid of these things.
There you go.
So this was this is about Google. And they had a silent donation, basically, where they had a corporate emails reveal Google executives' effort to turn out Latino voters who they thought would vote for Clinton ended up voting for Trump, essentially. So they did an analysis where they sent money, they sent out vans and stuff because they thought, this is, and their emails, their internal communications revealed, hey, this is going to get Hillary votes, and then ended up getting a larger percentage of Trump votes than they imagined.
I thought that was
So
funny.
I thought that was just kind of funny,
That's hilarious.
an irony. There's nothing really to talk about except, haha. Just the prejudices we have, though, assuming based on race, skin color, whatever, that they're going to vote a particular ideology, continue to amuse me. Because I can't be frustrated by it any longer. I just have to be amused
The thing
at the
that's
foolishness that comes with
this
that.
thing that's very interesting to me is the thing that's very interesting is why do the social media companies feel it's their right to influence how we vote in the country? Why aren't they just interested in that we're talking to each other? Why do they feel? Why are they so interested in how we vote or who we vote for?
And they do see it as a right, but I think they also see it as a duty.
Right. I mean, but
where does the duty part come from?
On their part, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, they think it's their moral, social duty. Right.
It is. That is the reason why I believe they should be regulated, because they have stepped in between the individual American and his right to say whatever. And for all intent and purposes, they've become the public square. And I don't think that the Founding Fathers could have anticipated.
Yeah, because it comes back to
that.
what we've talked about many times before. It's that neo-Marxist ideal that basically have groups and power is what separates those entities. And the structures, the power structures, so they see themselves as a power structure. Therefore, they have a duty as a power structure to equalize power, to take power away from those who have it, to give it to those who don't. And so that's where it comes from. I mean, that's
so take it from themselves and give it to somebody else.
The fallaciousness.
But no, not themselves, but from everybody else.
No, the fallaciousness that they're not a power, power structure that doesn't need to be equalized.
Exactly.
Well, they believe that they are representing the lower power structure. Yeah. Therefore, they don't have to lose power to do that. They can use their power.
That's such.
It's a fundamental problem with neo-Marxism anyway, because it assumes somebody has power and it's okay for them to wield it.
Right.
To crush other powers,
exactly,
and you don't have to turn it on yourself.
This is a Hegelian dialectic where Hegel's own ideas are outside of his dialectic.
Yeah,
it's the total Marxist. It's fallacious reasoning. It's that if Marxism is about equalizing power, the only power that isn't equalized is the Marxist's power.
Yeah,
to equalize.
Yeah, everything is it's an extension of the state. So there's no if you're an independent company in a traditional American system, you have government and you have private corporations and then there's public corporations and you have these distinct entities. But in their view, they're all an extension of the state. Therefore, they all have an obligation and a duty to control the vote or to manipulate and manage the vote.
That's a power.
They don't even realize that's what it is.
That's a power that needs to be reconciled by some state actors.
But notice, they view themselves as a extension of not the state, but a particular state ideology.
Oh yeah.
Which is, it belies what's going on. They really aren't about the state; they're about control or maintaining their control, as you know.
Yeah.
So, but it's not. Anyway,
well, the new state that they wish to
right,
well, and they are enacting it. For example, the guy who went into the synagogue and shot all those people.
Yeah,
they can't punish him, but they are punishing the people who allowed him a voice in the first place. So the social media entities are punishing the web. I don't even know what it is. I've never heard of it before. I think it's called Gab. They're punishing them for allowing him a platform to say whatever he was saying. So now and you see, but watch this. That is exactly the kind of regulation that they are fighting. That is exactly the kind of regulation that they're fighting, because they are punishing a social media site that allowed a guy to say what he wanted to say. And they themselves are arguing in courts every day that they are not subject to that sort of regulation.
That's right.
That's why they need to be regulated.
Yeah,
and I'm not a regulation guy, but they need to.
It's a weird time.
Regulate.
Yeah.
Don't obfuscate. Regulate.
Power to the people. All right, well, maybe that's a good time to take us to
I think it's a really
actual
good time,
discussion of theology.
It's talking about sin. So
my funny topic turned all serious.
It's a serious
apparently that's adding sauce.
Yeah, exactly. Funny sauce.
Are you trying to be funny? I didn't catch the joke there.
I know. So you still think our first episode was funny?
I do.
Right.
That episode killed.
Let it go.
Oh, it
let
killed,
go.
all right.
That episode killed.
Oh, we're in agreement.
All right.
So one of the things that comes up, and this is once again this I'm reading from a selection.
The State of Theology survey that was
survey.
done by Ligonier Ministries.
On,
We've been going over the last couple weeks.
right,
And this is just continuing sort of like,
Continuing
what do people
that.
say?
and there's a number of questions or statements that people deal with
Yeah.
in there, and they're it's just open to anybody who randomly comes on it. It's been
Yeah.
there for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And
Pretty
they promote every couple. I think it's about every 2 years to say, okay, here's the newest results, and you can look at any of the results and go through and get all kinds of demographics for every single.
The thing that's interesting, I
It's
wonder
online
if that
interactive. It's really actually,
It's very.
people
It's the
come
most
up.
interactive one I think I've ever seen.
I wonder if they are able to cut it off like on a year.
Oh, they do, yeah.
And so you could see how things have
They do.
changed, or if
Yep.
things change. In your
You can
life.
go in, that's what you're saying, you can go into their site and you can actually drill down on anything. You can say select, all men from this year or all evangelical women from this year or non-evangelical.
And from this location area, from this area,
and you can
age
That's
groups.
a very interesting.
drill down
thing.
every
It's very-
demographic
yeah.
related to a set of questions or a specific question,
Yeah.
and it'll give you all that data, and
It's all broken down.
creates a nice little visual
Did we put the link out?
for that. Yeah. The link's on the archive of the post that I make, so I link to that and all of them. So yeah, if people aren't sure, they can just go to morecake.org and look up the latest podcast and below the last two, and I'll do the same with this week. I'll put a link to that survey, so it's easy to find, and it's pretty neat to play around with.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So
So
All right,
one of the
continue,
questions, and it comes up, and it had this or some similar to in a question in other conversations. I'm sure you have too. The question is, the statement is this: even the smallest sin deserves eternal damnation. And this is from all participants for 2018. They 58% strongly disagree with this. 11% somewhat disagree with this. So that's 69, almost 70% say no. That's just
so
not
not
right.
every sin essentially is worthy of condemnation.
Right. There
But this restated in a positive way.
right.
Of what they're
Well,
asserting.
Yeah, the smaller sins aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What that survey is tracking is not. That survey is tracking how what people think about God's holiness.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
His holiness.
fill in that.
Yeah.
Go with that.
Why
Explain
is that? Because if people saw God as holy and separate, then they could see how one sin, one breaking of His law, would get a person condemned. Right?
Yeah.
But the very fact that they don't believe that, or the majority don't believe that one little sin is damnable, then that's really that isn't saying what they think about themselves. It's saying what they think about God's holiness.
Yeah. I think maybe the idea that the love trumps holiness or justice or any of those other qualities of God.
Yeah, because
Somehow
God,
that's the
God
one
grades
that
on the
matters.
curve, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And God doesn't grade on the curve. Ward does, but God doesn't.
Well, and part of that is, it's true, it's not true. In terms of salvation, no, there isn't. But as we were talking about at our meeting the other day, we were reading through the book of Revelation. I think that there's a gross misunderstanding on the part of Christians in general, evangelicals, whatever the category, of that our deeds are judged by God. That there is a
1 Corinthians
progressive state of eternity, a progressive qualitative, existence in eternity for both heaven and hell. So in other words, I'm judged on my point of salvation in relationship to what Christ has done on the cross. But after that, as a Christian, I'm still judged by my works. And somehow there's a qualitative difference in heaven for those who are faithful and saved in many things as opposed to those who are not. And we see that throughout the book of Revelation. And the same is in hell, too. The little old lady that only told a couple white lies, or, the guy who had a drinking problem but would otherwise, was helpful or kind to people, but all who were rejected Christ are not punished separated from God in hell in the same way as a Hitler type.
To the same
extreme.
degree.
To the same
You're
degree.
talking about degree.
Yeah.
Right.
In terms of degree.
Okay.
And that is because of God's justice.
Yes.
Because God isn't going to treat the garden variety pagan the same way He's going to treat or punish Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's partly where that confusion comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people instinctively know that it wouldn't be just if God treated Hitler the same as, a little kid, a 18-year-old kid, a young man or woman at 18 who died in an accident whose worst sin was they yelled at their parents, or something like that.
And what we're saying is that that's God's justice being meted out, even when people reject Him.
Yeah.
Even when people reject Him, that's God's justice being meted out.
Yeah.
I'm only asking.
That's the fairness of God,
right,
in His decision.
And I'm asking this question: do you think that is why hell has so many different, descriptions in the text? I'm just saying. That's a question that I'm asking. I'm not making a statement.
I don't know.
What do you mean by different descriptions?
So
there's different hells. So there's different purposes for several of them. The lake of fire being the final location for all. So what do you mean by different?
So sometimes hell is described as out there, or being separate from where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, etc. Bitter cold, or utter darkness, or even the flames of hell. I mean, and I think all of those are real. I'm just asking, do you think that is why the descriptions are so different? And I don't know. I mean, I haven't really looked at it.
I'm not sure about
my first instinct is to no, but I think those are just different descriptions of the same. I think the easiest way to understand it is, for me, is I think when we talk about heaven or hell, regardless of those imagery that we have in our mind, one is eternal separation from God,
right,
and the other is eternal presence with God, which is all people ask for. So when somebody says, it's not fair that God would send me to hell, it's like, but if you're rejecting Christ and God, you're saying, I don't want God in my life. Eventually, He just gives you what you're asking for, a place without His presence for eternity, which is what you've asked for. Right. Now, the Bible describes that as a pretty nasty place to be. But that's what people are choosing in that sense.
Heaven's described pretty positively, and you said no to it.
Yeah.
So
that's a choice, but inside that eternal destiny of eternal presence with God or eternal separation, there is a distinction. His justice is not just the same for everything, for every person.
His justice would be the same for everyone, but His justice would recognize distinctions.
Yeah,
or in their work.
It would be meted out differently.
Right, but
that's why I said it's not the same. But
right. I think in this statement here, even the small sin deserves eternal damnation. I think it's actually maybe it's very intentional, but misleading. Okay, I think it's misleading because
the question itself,
the statement itself, even the small sin deserves eternal damnation, and that statement. Or if you want to pose the question, that's fine too. Yeah,
I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
because. I think it's many Christians, many well-meaning Christians, think in these terms, and it's actually, I think, not biblically unsound.
Right. I know exactly what you mean.
How so? I mean, just
because everyone we know, Christian or not, commits a sin. Small sins, large sins, but not everyone is damned. The reason the difference is not does a Christian commit sin or not? It's not that. The issue is, as you alluded to before, is a restored relationship with the Lord. In John 3, it talks about, for all, for God so loved the world, He gave His only Son, that for all who will believe in Him, He'll have eternal life. It goes on to say that for those who don't believe in Him, they stand condemned already. The condemnation, as far as heaven or hell, is not based on
one small sin.
In one sense, yes, all sins do deserve eternal damnation, but we're not eternally damned based on committing small sins or large sins.
Yes.
So that's where I think there's a little bit of confusion. There's overlap, but there's a little bit of confusion on that, because the issue of salvation is not, did you commit a sin? Clearly we did.
Yeah.
The issue is, as you were talking about, did we accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior or not?
Yeah.
If you did, okay, you sinned. I'm going to take care of that in heaven. less rewards. In hell, more punishment. But that's based on the primary issue is, did you accept Lord as Jesus as Lord and Savior? It's not, did you commit a sin? We all committed sins. That's almost an irrelevant point to the issue of eternal damnation. So that's why I think it's a little...
Yeah, the percentages could be skewed depending on which way you interpret that question.
Right.
Whether somebody say agree or disagree. They might be disagreeing with that statement based on a deeper theological perception of that, like, interpretation of that, than maybe was intended when they wrote it. So.
Right, or agree with it, because like I would agree that even the smallest sin deserves eternal damnation, but people aren't eternally damned for committing small or large sins. They're eternally damned for rejecting Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, or rejecting God. It's thumbing their nose at God, their Savior. That's the problem. Yeah. So that's the problem. So anyway, that's how I would try and cast it a little bit. So I think maybe it was maybe they could have, and I didn't read all of these around that. If they could have asked other questions to be more clear on that, they could have asked, or statements. They could have had this one.
Yeah, and I haven't investigated all of it, but I'm sure there's a series of questions and really good analysis of all of these things require you to look at a selection of multiple questions that all address the same point from different angles, and then you've really got to dig into how those cross over, just as a side of how anybody's analyzing any data. And we haven't, to be fair, done that deeper analysis for all of it. For all of those questions that might be relevant. Yeah. We're just trying to speak on its face of it and give some initial thoughts. But that's an analysis, like you said, that's worth being done to see what those numbers really mean.
Sure. Do people make those distinctions? And do Christians especially make those distinctions? Yeah. Because I can remember having conversations with people where I accidentally did not make that distinction, and I had to go back and go, oh, by the way, I was wrong. I didn't say it properly. Here's biblically what's going on. People don't go to hell because they commit a little sin. Right. All right. Yeah. That's just not the case. The issue is we commit a sin because we're sinners, and we're going to heaven or hell based on our relationship or lack thereof with the Lord Jesus Christ. So restore a relationship. Yeah. So sure.
You good with that?
I agree.
All right, cool.
I think Ward is right for the first time in a long time.
Thank you, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Special sauce guy.
Special sauce.
Thanks for the sauce there. I appreciate that.
Just trying to add in where I can.
There you go. There's one of these I want to bring up next time, but I want to find out. I'll do a little more. I want to get some more resources on it. It's a very important question, but we'll get into that.
So you just have to tell us the question. We'll teaser for next week.
Teaser for next week.
Yeah.
You're gonna like this.
Oh,
wow. Jesus is the first and greatest being created by God.
Oh, that's a good question. Don't even tell the answers.
So, anyway,
Leroy's favorite theology.
That's a bad question.
In light of
that question, that question is trying to elicit to see how well people think about Jesus.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
What are some initial?
No, we can't talk about it.
Sorry.
We're gonna save it for next week.
Off the cuff. No, I'm just. Gender identity is a matter of choice.
No.
So, how do you think participants from the ages of 18 to 34?
They all responded the same way.
No. Well, no. I mean, here's the scale. You can see it's quite diverse. Quite diverse. Strongly disagree that it's a matter of choice, 30%, and somewhat disagree is 13%. So 43% disagree, but 44% agree. 46 agree or strongly agree with that. So it's almost split.
So what is the right biblical position, and what is the right cultural position? What is the right answer to those?
Because
Are they
there's
the
variation. They should be, but they're not.
Yes, they are.
The biblical position is that God, in the beginning, God created them male and female. Right?
Yes, you're right.
I think that's Genesis
1:26,
1:26 to 20,
yeah.
1:25, 26.
and 27. Yeah.
And in so doing, he made them distinct, and because he made them that way, and he's the sovereign authority in all of the universe. It is what he has to say that matters, rather than the cultural view, which is what people have to say about what God has made.
So when you mention there from Genesis, are you talking about gender or are you talking about sex? You see this as being the same or distinct?
I see them. Well, let's. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Well, see, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
They make a distinction between biological sex and gender,
Right, because
which is considered a social construct.
I don't see
To the point where biological has no meaning. It's only the social construct of gender that
which
has
is
any value.
which is if you could just pause for a second, which is just ridiculously crazy that they're going to argue on one hand that we're anti-science, and then on this they're anti-science.
That's a good point.
I know,
because they're saying the science doesn't matter. The science of biology doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But what were you going to say?
At least not to that point.
Yeah, at least at that point.
Right. So, but they don't define gender here, but culturally, I know you teach on this. We've talked about this. Gender would be what culturally speaking. So we understand what we're talking about. How
so
culturally, gender
culture
is
though
malleable.
generally says it's okay to change gender, right?
But what are you changing then?
But no, I'm just saying. But that's their view though. Generally,
right.
Culturally, it's acceptable.
Fluid.
It's fluid,
right?
Yeah, I even have a flyer from Harvard that says gender is changeable and it can even change on a daily basis. And so to argue against that, they say it's wrong. Now, take that and then take this story.
Oh, okay, all right.
Because take this story, because even that answer is not correct, even though it's correct.
Okay, right.
Here's why. Title of this comes out of the Christian Post, but I've seen it a couple places. The title is X Gay. So a guy who's said he's not gay anymore.
Former gay.
X Factor contestant faces backlash for saying he found Christ left LGBT lifestyle. So here he said he changed his gender identity.
Right, but that's not allowed.
Because of Jesus.
Right.
That's not allowed though. So here's the actual thing. So Matthew Grinch is a singer vocal coach, appeared on X Factor Malta. So this is in Malta. And in one of his videos, he said how when he came to faith in Christ, he changed from the LGBTQX lifestyle, right. And now has a different thing. So it says here, the X Factor Malta distanced itself from Gretsch in a statement saying that the organization wanted to make it, quote, very clear that no part of Matthew Gretsch's original audition was intended to cause offense, nor were the views expressed those of the producers of the program. Additionally, the Times of Malta reported that after backlash to Gretsch's televised comments, the Maltese government felt compelled to release a statement assuring that sexual orientation and gender identity were protected by law in the Mediterranean archipelago. The government also condemned the practice of what is derisively calls conversion therapy, in which people will, with unwanted same-sex attraction, seek counseling. The government says, quote, while the government condemns all such homophobic comments, broadcasting this message without a calling out of the harm caused by conversion therapy is damaging. The government statement reads, again, quote, it puts at risk those youths who are vulnerable to such practices despite Malta's adoption of strict legislation in 2016. So think about what that actually creates. As we said, this is the view, 46% view. This is the cultural thing is, yes, you can change your, it's on a spectrum.
But not for Jesus.
Fluid. Exactly. But when this guy says, hey, I was gay, but now I'm not.
Right.
And because of, that would be fine, except he adds, but because of Jesus.
Right.
Right.
Therefore, it's homophobic hate.
Right.
To say he made that change, even though
it changes every day.
To change.
Because it's a social construct.
Because it's a social construct.
So, which social construct is the right one? Is the valid one, and how do you determine that?
And what is going on is it's being determined locally, which tells you how fallacious it is, because every locale has a different standard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which tells you how fallacious it is.
Which group are you in? What's your social construct?
And what's your rationale for changing?
Right. Is it the person driving past
so
you on the road?
So it's changeable, but only with the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
That's as we keep refining this argument as it changes daily to suit whatever new circumstances arise. Yes, it's possible to change, but only if you change for non-Jesus reasons.
It's ridiculous.
It's unfathomable.
But I thought it was genetic, and you can't change.
Yeah, well, that used to be the argument too. Yes, people who are gay are born that way.
Right.
It's genetically predetermined. But now that argument is also apparently homophobic, even though that was the argument from, the LGBTQ community for at least a week.
So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking that gender is physical. It is psychological. So let me rephrase that. Instead of physical, I'll say gender is both biological and psychological, or at least the discussion of gender is psychological. And then I would also add that maybe it's philosophical too, right? Because the philosophical aspect would cover the social construct question that people are asking. Gender is biological because, every male has an X? Or
X, the difference between the X and the Y.
The difference between X and Y.
Male and female.
Right, so...
That's considered hate speech.
Honestly,
I saw a gal was booed out of an audience in
just biology.
California school.
I would just say it's biology.
Saying that there's a biological distinction.
No, I would just say it's biology.
The crowd turned rough. They actually hurt somebody.
Yeah, I believe it, but I would still say it's biology. We can't let troglodytes bully us from the truth.
Yeah, well,
beat us out of the truth.
That's right.
I think you could say that there is a difference between sex and gender, with this caveat. Yes, there is a social component to gender identity, in that do boys wear blue or girls wear pink? That's a complete social fiction.
Right. And
you can find that there isn't a biological need for boys to wear blue and girls to wear pink. That's completely true. But if we take that term then to eliminate biological reality, that's a problem. But if we say there's a social component that is still tethered to the biological and constrained by that, then that's okay.
Yeah, because
in that sense, if we want to use another term to describe what are the cultural, sort of components, like people that get mad at girls because they wore pants
and boys because they danced in ballet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just assume a guy's gay because he likes to bake or something.
Yes,
that's
foolishness.
That's culture, and that's foolishness. Right. And if that's what we mean by gender, then that's a total fictional thing.
Right. But we also have to delineate what we mean by gender from that cultural aspect, which is gender is. I mean, I had this discussion the other day. Gender is soulish. I mean, it is created by God. I mean, and it reflects in some way God's own nature, His own image, and because God is the one who created it, God is the one who has final say over His creation. Now, how people function is where people have their own autonomy and free will, if you will, in order to function in accord with the way God has created them, or in opposition to the way God has created them. And I think we need to have a distinction. We need to make sure that part is distinct. It is the same thing for the guy who creates the chair and the desk. The guy who creates the chair and the desk are the one, he gets to name his creation, and he gets to say what he created it to do. Now, how people use it, I mean, some people sit on chairs and some people throw them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Some people write on desks and some people sit on them. How people get to use a thing that was created is far different than the Creator's intent. And I think we just need to recognize that. And we being Christians can't be bullied out of these beliefs because they're not culturally appropriate. And
so you think that Christians in particular are being shut out of the conversation or the Christian message?
It's very interesting. Here's what I would say. I would say that just looking at it from our perspective, we as the church on the whole, there are members in the church that think very well. and think about these topics very well, and they study these topics very deeply, and there are members within the church, the body of the church, who don't think very well or study these topics very deeply, insofar as the ones who think very well and study these topics deeply, they can go toe to toe with people in the culture who are making these deep arguments about it. But on the main, we're not talking about this very well, and I think from our perspective, we need to think about it and talk about it better, so that we can relate some of these very difficult and complex issues to the people who disagree with us. That way, and when we do that, we can stand our ground on that truth, regardless of whether they like it or not. I mean, that's in essence what it means to contend for the faith.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer to the question too is Christians are being sort of, I guess, bullied or shamed out of it. And think about that story. A guy just simply said, "This is my experience. I used to be this, now I'm this."
Because of Jesus.
Because of Jesus.
Right.
But that's all I said is, here's my story. He didn't say, his statement was not everyone else is wrong.
Right.
His statement was not that everyone else was in sin or anything. He just said, this is what happened to me based on my relationship with Jesus.
And the whole country had to come out.
The government actually officially said was homophobic.
Wow.
His story, his personal experience was defined as homophobic. So yeah, that's probably the definition of,
Well, there's an example I posted to someone on Facebook that there was a gay couple who were married, and they came out in opposition to gay marriage, or they're gay couple, they don't want to be married. They're a gay couple, and they're called homophobic,
which used to be, by the way, the dominant view 20-ish years ago.
Right.
The majority of surveys where the majority of gay couples did not want the gay marriage to be approved because they thought it was a useless piece of paper anyway.
Right. Well,
and then somehow it switched, and then that did become the marginalized view.
Right. And then even they, as a gay couple, are being treated as homophobic, literally.
Yeah.
Called homophobic. It's like, wait.
It's like calling black people white supremacists these days. What does that mean? It happens all the time.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's
absurd. It's absurdity.
Well, here's the absurd. Here's a illustration of absurdity. I found this story this week. So the headline of this one is male teacher ordered to observe teen girl in shower.
What?
So in the age of Me Too,
where
gender is anything you want it to be, this male teacher is ordered to observe a girl in the shower room, which in another context he would be fired for.
Right.
But in this context, he'll be fired if he doesn't. Here it is. The male physical education teacher in a Florida school district has been told he will be transferred to another school as disciplined for not doing his job. His job? Walk in to and supervise the locker room. And why didn't he? The possibility was a teen girl showering there with the boys in her class.
So wait, I want to make sure he didn't do it.
No, he refused to do that.
Good for him.
Because he didn't. Yeah, so it says this.
Man.
Chasco Middle School, I might be saying it wrong, in Land O'Lakes, Florida, has drawn the attention of nonprofit legacy group Liberty Council for adopting the transgender activist agenda. Matt Staver, founder and chairman of the Liberty Council, said that the Pasco County School Board must rein in these rogue school employees and administrators and reject that unauthorized LGBT policies and practices that violate parental and employer rights and privacy rights of students. Liberty Council has written a letter to Cynthia Armstrong, chairman of the Pasco County School District, in response to the unwritten policy that allowed a girl to use the boys' bathroom and required others to refer to her with false gender pronouns he and him. So they said, the Liberty Council said the PE teacher identifies Robert O. and Stephen C., so it looks like there was two, objected to administration orders to allow the girl into the bathroom with no forewarning to the boys or their parents so that the boys could take steps to protect their privacy. Administrators told them that informing the boys so they could take steps to protect their privacy would be discriminatory and subject them to discipline. So they disciplined the boys if they chose not to be in the locker room to watch the girl undress. So if that happened, just try to run through the scenarios in your head where that was another context.
That's a title. They should go to Title IX against these people.
Robert also objected. Well, I think they mentioned that in the story that there is a Title IX issue with that. Might be the story. But Robert also objected to administration orders that he continued to walk into this and supervise the locker room, despite a girl potentially being nude or undressed in that area. The administration told him that the girl in question had, quote, every right to use the locker room, including the right to disrobe in the open locker area and shower in the open showers, where Robert is required to periodically walk in and supervise. Liberty Counsel declared the district that Robert will, quote, not knowingly place himself in a position to observe a minor female in the nude or otherwise in a state of undress. Now Robert has been told by administrators that he will be transferred to another school as discipline for not doing your job in the locker room.
Well, good job for him for having the guts to do what is morally right in the face of absurd, immoral claims.
Think about this. So if the girl who biologically is female, still, I mean, this girl, there's no question that she's biologically female, but self-identifies as male.
Or male-ish,
Yeah, she walks in, but she chooses to walk in there.
You can't forewarn her.
You're forced, you have to be there to observe it. You cannot leave, or that's whatever.
That's right.
However, if a girl who identified as female walked into the room unannounced and took off her clothes, she would be kicked out of school. Or if the teacher invited her to come in and disrobe, he would be accused of, he would be fired. He would be called a predator. He'd probably be prosecuted as a sexual predator for, encouraging a female to disrobe. An underage female to disrobe.
What if he's in there observing her when she walks in, identifying as a male? Halfway through changing, she says, "No, I identify as a female now, and you're watching me, and you're guilty. Are you now guilty?"
Or even if she's still identified and she said, "I felt uncomfortable having him look at me," because her comfort is the thing that determines the reality. So, because that's what sexual assault is considered. It's an unwanted or unwelcome glance is considered sexual assault.
That's right.
So it still could be sexual assault, even though she identified as a male.
That's insane.
He had an unwanted look at me.
That is insane.
Even though he's required to look at me.
That is practically insane.
This is untenable, is the point. I mean, you can go through every scenario like this and realize that this is unmanageable. It's impossible to regulate this sort of thing because it has no tie to reality.
It proves that the past distinctions and the past way of thinking about these issues was correct.
Yeah,
it was correct. It was right. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean,
shows the need for him, the absurdity of laying him aside. You lay him aside, all this follows, and it follows logically. It does.
You're going to blame a man who refuses to look at a disrobed minor. We're throwing people in jail for years
for doing exactly that.
For respect.
We're ruining their lives and their careers for doing exactly that.
And women demand respect, and they're going to from men, and they throw them in jail or lose their job when they do the respect.
As we used to say, your cotton picking mind. Yeah. Are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
I could go to jail for saying cotton picking.
That's true.
Oh my gosh. People,
I think I would before you.
The word police, though. The word police.
Yeah.
And the idea police.
Well,
the police.
Yeah, that goes back to the story that, the Green family, their Hobby Lobby had decorations with pieces of cotton in a jar. Oh, yeah. And that was deemed as racist. Wow. Okay. So that's therefore, that's your phrase is not, your acknowledgement of that is not in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. But even the statement of that.
But none of this is tenable. None of it is.
And that's what people, I think we have to realize. Even setting aside a Christian worldview and biblical perspective on this, and these surveys that give these seemingly conflicting answers, setting aside that whole Christian solution to this, even if you don't embrace that, I don't know if this guy was a Christian or not that refused it. He just might have been a guy that felt uncomfortable. He might have been a guy that said, look, if I did this on my own, he might just be reading the tea leaves, so to speak, and looking out there at the Me Too movement and saying, look, I'm not going to put myself in this position. He might have had no moral objection to it, whatever. He just might have said, look, if I put myself in this position, I could get in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
But by not putting himself in the position, he got into the same trouble. So it's this old phrase, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. How do you do? It's because there's no right objective legal or moral standard. It's completely subjective based on the perceptions of whatever individual is involved in the case. In this case, it's the girl. So her subjective response to the environment determines what is morally right and legally right for everybody else in that room. You put a different person in there who has a different subjective response, and there's a new legal standard for everybody else in that room. That's impossible because you can't know ahead of time what somebody will feel or emote given in some certain circumstance.
Why would you even put
Yet you're still held responsible based on even their after the fact.
Why would you even put boys in that position? Why would you even put young boys in that position? I was a high school football coach, and we were playing this team, and on the other side of the field, we looked, and they had girls suiting up to play in the game.
Yeah.
And I was going to forfeit the game. I literally was going to forfeit the game because why are we going to play a team that has girls on the football field? And my immediate reasoning wasn't an objection that girls can't play football. Of course they can. Anybody can throw a ball. But what happens if one of these girls get hurt?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not because they are inferior. It's not my view. It's because they're women. And I don't think it's right for me to train boys to beat up on, to hit girls and knock them out, get snot bubbles by knocking a girl on the ground and tackling her. I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
But they're going to subject these boys into this situation. These are just people who the people in management don't deserve to be in those positions that they hold. They show that they lack common sense. They show that they lack common decency, and they show they're just inhuman in this situation.
When I was 17, 16, something like that, maybe 15, I don't know. I remember there was a girl. I wrestled. In Pennsylvania, wrestling was a big deal. I started when I was 5 years old, man. I was whatever. And I remember once there was a girl that was supposed to wrestle, and I don't know if it was the first in the state of Pennsylvania, but it had to be close to one of the first women to be wrestling as far as a men's sport. So it was still like a thing. It was like, wow, really? That's crazy. Wow, I remember all week, man, we were giving this guy, hassling this guy about he had to wrestle the girl and stuff like that, and just whatever. Our friend that was in there. So we go to the weigh-ins. Now, in wrestling weigh-ins, the ones that have been there, depending on the guy's weight, they're in various states of,
disrobement.
Yes,
right.
Various states of, and some guys weigh in naked because they can't even afford the weight of a couple ounces of a jock strap because they need to make weight. And some guys just a jock strap. Some guys wear their singlets on there because they're easy underweight. So it's various states of being disrobed. And so it gets time for this girl to weigh in. And, of course, the coaches have to witness it and the refs have to witness it because that's who it is. But they cleared out all the guys. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that she was actually fairly attractive. So we were like, this is not fair. We need to be there. But, she had her, I think shorts on, and she had some kind of wrap around her chest, because she was wrapped to wrestle. So she didn't get, I guess, injured while she was wrestling or something. But think about that scenario in that case. They kicked out all the guys to do that. Well, because she was wrestling with the guys, she still saw herself as female. She just wanted to wrestle with the guys,
right.
In the guys' sports. But had she said, no, I identify as a man today, we would have been forced not to leave the room. Matter of fact, if we had asked to leave the room, we'd probably be kicked off the team. And if she chose to weigh in naked, we'd have been forced to watch and witness like we do everybody else's. I just can't even imagine at that age when we were thinking of that, as foolish, immature kids and all the weird stuff we thought about that circumstance, just dealing with how do we even make a decision at this point. So, think about kids today forced into these decisions without the faculties to analyze,
to wrestle through
all this, to literally wrestle through all these competing ideas. This is no easy thing.
It is this. Listen, in World War II, in the Battle of Stalingrad or St. Petersburg, there was a woman who was one of the world's most prolific snipers. She killed over 300 and some odd men. But she's battling for her homeland, and it's either them or us.
Yeah.
The trench line was that close. The movie that you could see her portrayed in loosely is called Barbarians at the Gate.
Oh yeah, that's good.
It's a true story. It's based on a true story.
Yeah.
I could see in combat.
Wasn't it a guy sniper in the movie though?
Vasily Zaitsev.
Yeah,
this is his name. When I went to sniper school, we had to read about that. We actually read about the.
But you're saying that's a woman, not a Vasily?
Vasily Zaitsev is the man, but there was a woman who was his equal as well.
Okay.
And we had to read about them both. You know, we read all these stories of snipers' exploits in wars and their ingenuity during the war. It was really fascinating stuff. So I sit back and I think about that. You know, that's even in that kind of warfare, it's different. The men and women are not really engaging hand to hand in combat, because 90% of the time, 99% of the time, if a man engages a woman in combat hand to hand, she is going to lose, because he has a physical advantage over her. Yeah. What man wants to see a woman in that position? What American male wants to see an American woman in that position? Yeah. Some do, but they just don't want their daughters to be in that position. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Whenever we think of combat, I think they tend to think of the distance between the two rather than what combat really is. When you have two men locked in hand-to-hand combat, and it's a life or death struggle. Yeah,
well, the same way as if you see stories where if you're a full-grown man in his 30s and you come out to battle and there's a kid on the other line who's 10.
Yeah,
you would not respond to that kid the same way as you would somebody who was the same age,
male or female.
Male or female. I mean, if it's a 10-year-old boy.
Right.
You'd think,
which is what the Iraq has used. The women and children, when we were in the first war,
right.
They put them up front so the Americans, because they knew the Americans had the morality not to shoot them.
Wouldn't hesitate.
Wouldn't shoot them
until they started blowing up Americans, and then people had
to. Which then they have all kinds of psychological damage
because they're killing some kid that they don't.
Children.
And the whole point is.
But see, there's a different. That's
we're acknowledging
a difference.
We're acknowledging distinctions. Women and children first is that statement is there for a reason.
Yeah. And I think we'll close with this too, because maybe each of us can make a point on this. Those distinctions do not mean inferiority.
They don't.
Or less value. And that is something I think really needs emphasizing. As crazy as all these circumstances and stories are, what the Christian worldview and a biblical worldview would tell us is that we should not hate any of those people. We should not be angry or belligerent or treat them poorly.
Mm-hmm.
If people are in our lives who are family or friends or acquaintances, or even if somebody says, hey, I want to use this bathroom and goes through that, or if they're in a class, whatever, they need to be treated with respect and dignity because they are still created in God's image. God. Right. No matter how big or small the sin, it doesn't matter to God. He still creates them. He still loves them. He still wants to see them come to saving relationship with Jesus Christ. And I think where the church has failed in the past, my thought is that where the church has failed is that we've acknowledged the problems with the way the world approaches it, but we've done so in a way that doesn't demonstrate the love of Christ and demonstrates a worldly approach. We just have to beat these people in arguments or vilify these people or make them horrible human beings or denigrate them or call them names. I remember years ago, what was it, when Ellen DeGeneres had her TV show and it came out that she was a lesbian. What's his name came on TV and said, Ellen DeGeneres. Called her Ellen DeGeneres. And that was somehow okay. That was never okay.
Right.
And I think that's what started to change the minds of a lot of young people, realizing that's degrading. You can disagree and say that this might be wrong or sinful or whatever, but there's no reason to degrade her as a human being because you have a biblical moral
difference
issue of lifestyle, or even a difference of opinion in other things. So I don't know. I just want to think that's important that we reinforce that aspect that each of you guys may make.
I would say I agree with that. My hostility is not toward people who are who are living in whatever state they're living in. I mean, Lord knows I have relatives that live differently than I do. So I don't vilify them.
In a lot of ways. Not just about this one issue.
Not this is one issue, but all kinds of ways. It's not my job to vilify them. The hostility that I have is toward those people who think that who think they can force us to think that we should think differently than we do. That's where my hostility.
But even if you're
and it's not in the sense of hatred of them. it's in the sense of wanting to oppose them. That's what I mean by that.
Yeah, but you still have to treat them
of course.
with dignity and respect, right? I mean, I just want to clarify that.
Yeah. I mean,
At least I hope so. Otherwise, we're going to talk. We're going
to
add some flavor.
Yeah.
And Ward, what are your final thoughts on that?
The message, one of the goals from a few years ago, the gay and lesbian type movement, was to be able to have at least the basic acceptance in life here. We don't want to be demonized or mistreated, which is an absolutely fair thing. And I think Christians should have been leading the way on that and weren't.
Yeah.
And we failed in that sense. But the pendulum has swung to where they don't want to give anybody else a fair hearing either. They don't want anyone else to have an opinion. They don't even want to have an opposing idea. They're so set on trying to make themselves. They're trying to find peace that they're not going to have in life. They're trying to find peace and happiness in life at the expense of other people and those who oppose them. That's where they're trying to find peace. That's where they're trying to find joy by just obliterating all what they consider to be things that oppose them. Then I will have a guilt-free life, because I think that guilt is generated from social. It's a social construct as well, and it's not. The guilt of sin for all of us is generated by the same person, and it's the work of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And you can't kill God, so they try and kill the message and messenger. So that, I think, is what's going on.
That's actually a really good point. That guilt is not a social construct.
Right.
And recognizing that that's exactly what's trying to happen is eliminate the assumed social construct of that, when it's really a nature that they're creating God's image, and there's the Holy Spirit who convicts, and that can't be eliminated by changing the social moral standards.
But it can be eliminated, and they do have that. The peace of God that transcends all understanding, the forgiveness of sin and forgiveness for things that embraced for all of us is available to them, to all of us. That's why it's equal. At the cross, the ground, as you've heard, is level.
Yeah, everyone kneels at the foot of the cross. There's nobody standing up. We're all down on our hands and knees.
And that's what we need, as Christians, need to remember, not politics, but the cross of Christ for the solution. So. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good way to close our time today, too, just emphasizing that cross of the Christ and the equalizing power of that and the importance of that. So we'll be back. We'll do a few more theological ones next week.
Yep.
And hopefully 2 o'clock.
See, I told you, flavor. That's why we didn't get through a lot.